we're learning Sim Kufidalad Halacha Ches. So the Shulchan Aruch starts off with a whole slew of cases where we don't need to be concerned that there's non-kosher wine mixed in, hakafrizim, hakafutav, hakavim shalem, a whole bunch of different cases, and there's all kinds of very fine details to it. All kinds of details about which foods are or do not have a concern that somebody who is not Jewish might have mixed in non-kosher wine into it. And then Shulchan Aruch, I'm doing this reading quickly. And there's no concern that they put in wine to it. And this is, as we spoke about in Halacha Daled, that the only time we are choshesh that someone actually mixes in wine is when it's somehow beneficial for them. They're not out to get us, and therefore, if the only time we have to be concerned about wine being mixed in is when there's a legitimate reason why they might do that. They might do it to save money. They might do that because it's easier. They might do it for quality. That has to do with some of these cases over here. So if there's a reason, then we have to be choshesh. But if there's no legitimate reason, then we don't have to be choshesh that they mixed in wine. But in case there is, then we would be choshesh. So, like for example, I mentioned here olives, and there is concern. Particularly, they tell us in Greece that people use wine vinegar. It's very common to pickle or I don't know if it's very common. It is common for them to pickle the olives in wine vinegar. So in places like that, then of course we have a chashash. But otherwise, the Shulchan Aruch is telling us all kinds of cases we don't have a chashash. Whether all these exactly these didn't apply to us, it obviously depends on the time and place. But it teaches us a general rule that where there's no chashash that they mix in the wine, then we don't have to be choshesh. Now, what we're going to focus on in this short share is just on a side point that the Shulchan Aruch brings up, which is like this. The Shulchan Aruch says like this: you're allowed to eat the zaysim. Ubavad, Shulchan Aruch says, shaloyu chatuchos b'sakin shalhem. As long as they were not cut, that the guy did not cut it with his knife, and there are more six in them. Because since the olives are charif, therefore they would be belayed from a sakin, and that's because there's a general rule that if you cut something with a non-kosher knife, then there might be the end gets onto your food, but if you cut it of a charif, then the din says in Siman Tzadi Vav that the belia comes out from the knife also, and therefore, since the olives here are talking about olives that are charif, exactly what that case is a whole deal in the poskim. It's not relevant to us, but since it's a case where the olives are charif, therefore we have to be concerned that the belia would come out to the knife and get into the olive. Now, before we get into we're going to talk a little about the charif part of it, but the Shulchan Aruch is telling us that we only have to be concerned when we're dealing with double charif, but were we to be dealing with something that's not charif, then it's okay to buy the cut up, even if we know that the guy uses his knife, and that's because two things. First of all, there's an assumption. This comes from Siman Tzadi Vav, that there's an assumption that that the person probably uses special knives for cutting fruit. That's all he does, and then he cuts fruits and vegetables with those knives. This is common, like in a supermarket or a fruit store or a restaurant. Lots of them have special knives just for that. And the other thing is that chances are that he cut more than one slice at a time. He cut many, many pieces at a time. And therefore, there are some pieces that may have the end stuck onto them from the knife, but there are many more pieces that do not have any end on them, and therefore the ones that are, so to speak, treif are bought the baroi into the other ones. So the ones that were cut, if two of them have treif on them, and he cut 10 of them, then 8 is more than 2. So the 8 are mevatel 2, and you could assume every piece that you got is a piece that was not treif on it. Okay, now a similar didn't apply by fish. Fish has an extra complication in that fish. You have to know that the fish you're talking about is kosher. It's inherently kosher. When we're talking about fruits and vegetables, if you have a cut-up apple or cut up watermelon, you know that watermelon is kosher. We have a cut-up fillet of fish, then unless it has scales on it, or unless it's salmon, you would have no way of knowing that it's kosher. That's a secondary issue that you have to deal with, besides for whether there's something coming from the knife. Now, when the Shulchan Aruch says this in Hilchos Basar B'chol, in Siman Tzadi Vav, it's Halacha Daled, he says, over there he says, not only can you eat the cut-up fruit based on this logic that I just told you, but he says the same thing is also true if it's a double charif. His example there is lemons, and if you cut lemons is a double charif, and if you cut lemons, you have sliced lemons, or in this case it's lemon juice, then the din is you can eat it for these combination of these two reasons. One is he probably has special knives for cutting fruits and vegetables, and second, even if not, the amount of treif pieces are bottled into baroiv in the amount of kosher pieces. So the Achronim, as I'll mention a few names in a second, but the Achronim ask a kasha. Okay, they ask two types of questions on this. First of all, the first type of question is that there's a number of places where the Shulchan Aruch says that you should be machmir in that case. And one of those places that they point to is right our din. It says right over here, you can't buy olives that were cut with a treif knife. The Shulchan Aruch says, and there are more explained because the reason is because it's a double harv. So what happened to the din in Siman Tzadi Vav, where the Shulchan Aruch said that even if it's a double harv, you can buy the cut up fruit from the guy. So the one is just sort of like a technical, which is the Shulchan Aruch says over here seems to be not like the Mechaber over there. They have other kashrus from a din in Tzadi Vav itself, with Ramot seems to be machmir about cut up radishes, and also a shayla from a din in Hilchos Pesach, where the Torah says, and the Mechaber implies, that if you had cut olives with a knife that had been used for chametz, then you now eat those olives. You now eat those olives on Pesach. It was cut before Pesach. You now eat those olives on Pesach. Okay, so the one question that they ask is just like a stira over in Tzadi Vav. He says that it's mutter, and in other places the Shulchan Aruch or the Ramah implies that it's also. The second thing is that it's a logical question on the Ramah. So the Mechaber who's Mekel is seemingly as the Shitasei. That is to say, is the Ramah has two things that the Ramah is more machmir about than the Mechaber that are relevant. One is that the Ramah is machmir about which things are considered charv. There are more things that the Ramah considers charv than the Mechaber does. And therefore, as we're going to talk about next time, there's a special din for a double charv that's machayel l'shvach. It helps bring out old tam and make it into a good tam. So the Ramah holds that din applies to many more foods than the Mechaber does. And second is the Ramah in Siman Tzadi Beis is machmir for chanam v'shari surin to say that tam, when we mix a little treif into more heter, the heter becomes as if it's completely iser. So if we put those two din together, then we should say every time you cut the knife, you cut the fruit with the treif knife, the bliyas that are in there become machayel l'shvach, the bliyas in the knife are machayel l'shvach, and so the bliyas in the knife are machayel l'shvach, and then when it gets back into the food, it should now be as if it's 100% treif, and we should never be able to have bittul. So why would the Ramah be makel about this? And seemingly the Ramah should be machmir about this din, which she doesn't. Okay, so there's four different answers. There may be more. Four answers that I'm aware of. Four ways to deal with these questions. Okay, one is that the Bach and the Pri Chadash, and I suppose others say that but the second point is correct, and that at least Ashkenazim should be machmir on this din. The Mechaber may have said to be mekel, but it's not for sure. At least the Ramah should be machmir on this din. And in fact, if you cut a double charv, if you want to buy fruits and vegetables from a guy, if it's a double charv, then you can't buy it because of this problem. They may have cut it with a treif knife. That's what some say. The Shach, there in Siman Tzadi Vav, says that there's three levels of double charv. There are things that are very charv. Okay, that's the chiltas we're going to talk about next time. That's the Gemara's examples of charv. Then there's the ones that are so mild, the lowest level of charv. Those are like the lemons that the Shulchan Aruch was talking about in Siman Tzadi Vav. And then there's a middle level of charv, like olives, that's somewhat in between. So the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tzadi Vav is only being makel about lemons because they're really unlikely to be qualified as double charv. But if you have a case of olives, like in our din Shulchan Aruch, or the case in Orach Chaim, which was olives also, or the case in the beginning of Tzadi Vav, the Ramah talks about radishes. Those things are the middle level of charv, or maybe even the top level, the middle level of charv, and the middle level of charv. There, the place the Shach says you should not be makel and say that it's the whole chesed we said before, and that it's bottle bread and such. So the Shulchan Aruch only be makel about lemons. When we read the din of lemons and you think it means all double charv, it's not true. It only means a very specific kind of double charv. Okay, now. In fact, the Shach by us tells you, but the Shach on our din, when the Ramah says it's a double charv, and you should be choshesh that the bliya, that the olives are treif. He says, again, go look in Tzadi Vav. I'm going to tell you why. Okay, now many of the find this to be a big dachik, that the Mechaber is talking about a very specific case. It's a din of double charv, and the Mechaber tells you a specific case, and it only means that case you can make about lemons. A lot of the Achronim are not so happy about this. The Chavis Das in Siman Tzadi Vav says the only time you have to be machmir is for Pesach. He says it's a special chomer for Pesach, which is it did by chametz, that chametz from before Pesach, we have a special chomer called chayzer v'nir, the Rambam holds, or something like chayzer v'nir, and that is to say is that if you think about it, let's say in the case it was you cut olives, so we had 2 olives are treif and 8 olives are kosher. That's what example we said before, 2 are treif and 8 are kosher, so it's baltava, right? He says the problem is that on Pesach, since it's a bittul of yavish b'yavish, we would say it's chayzer v'nir, and on Pesach you would not be allowed to eat it. You have to assume it's asher b'mashu. That's what the Chavos says. So it's a special chomer for Pesach. All over the place it's baltava, right? But it's a special chomer for Pesach that we can't say because of the din of chayzer v'nir. Now, the Hafla argues on this. I didn't know this until someone pointed this to me, but there's the Hafla in the back of his Chidushim for Chulin has Chidushim on Shulchan Aruch plus B'chol V'Teruvos. So they're on Tzadi Vav. He says that this is not a case you would say chayzer v'nir, since it's only a bli, it's not a ben, you would not say chayzer v'nir, okay? And also, the Chavos came in not saying Arden. Arden is a chomer not by Pesach, Arden is a chomer by just olives, just stop by treif olives. Okay, and the last answer that I'm going to mention, or that I know of, that I'm going to mention, is from Yair Yehuda. Yair Yehuda said this. He says the din is like everyone understood until now, the simple understanding of the Shulchan Aruch and Tzadi Vav, that if you cut a davar harif, it's mutter. If you buy fruit, davar harif, it's mutter, because we assume that either you use kosher knives, or we didn't use a kosher knife, then the amount of pieces that are treif is bought the broid and the kosher pieces. That's what the Yair Yehuda says. But that kula only works in certain cases. Okay, I don't know if you use exactly these words, but it's an example where we need bittul in 121. Now, what does bittul in 121 mean? 121 means that we need a little bit more than twice bittul b'shishim, which means to say it's like this. Let's say the blade, I'm going to give an example. Let's say a blade has 0.2 cubic inches worth of blia. Okay, that's how much metal there is in a piece in a blade. We're just using it as an example. And when you were to cut, if you cut a lemon with that, then the blade goes in kedei netiyah. That's the din of Tzadi Vav. The blade goes in kedei netiyah, which is an etzba. So let's say if we calculate out that the lemon, cutting through that lemon, if you cut through the lemon, the lemon has 5 cubic inches to absorb, so to speak, hector to absorb that isser. So that means is every knife has in it enough time to give bleed into just less than 2.5 lemons. Okay, and each lemon has 5 cubic inches. The knife is 0.2 cubic inches worth of isser. So it could give time into 60 times the 0.2 is 12 cubic inches. So each lemon is 5. That's almost just a little less than 2.5 lemons would be enough. Is how much the time could spread into the lemons before it's not detectable. So that means is that if you cut 5 lemons with this knife, then you've cut more. You now have, there are however many pieces you have, but you have more kosher pieces than trade pieces, because it can only give time into shishim. It can only give time into a little less than 2.5 lemons. In truth, you have 5 lemons, so you have more kosher than treif. So the kosher pieces are mabatel, the treif pieces baray. We call that bittul in 121, which is a bittul is more than double shishim. So in this case, double shishim would be just under 5. So if we have 5 lemons, then we have bittul b'shishim. So the Yehuda says is that the only time we could be makel is in the case in Tzadi Vav where the Shulchan Aruch was makel is because you bought lemons from a person who's selling loads of lemons. Okay, and it's obvious that this person cut up dozens of lemons with his knife. So if that person uses knife to cut up dozens of lemons, there's for sure more hector. There's more kosher pieces than trade pieces, and about the baroi. First, about the bli, we know can only go till shishim. It can only go so far, and then the amount that it went is about the baroi in all the kosher pieces that were cut that the bli can't spread to. But in the other cases, in the case in Hilchos Pesach, or the case by us in our sin, are talking about that the guy just got one for you, or you just have one, a piece or two. So then, in that case, there's no possibility of saying that the trade pieces are false bread with the kosher pieces, and that's the case when the Shulchan Aruch be mekel. Okay, that's not so hard to read into the case in Orach Chaim or into the case in the beginning of Tzadi Vav with the Rambam there. It's not so great in our case. In our case, the Rambam sounds like the Shulchan Aruch sounds like you're buying it from a merchant. But the Yaakov says, no, it's talking about you just bought from a regular person. You went to your neighbor and he wants to give you cut up olive. So then, in that case, he didn't cut enough pieces to make it double. Okay? So, all this, we have to bear in mind that all these things that we're talking about are also not double harv. If you just regular cut up fruits and vegetables, cantaloupe and watermelon, then everyone will agree that in those cases you could buy them. You could assume that the pieces you're getting are kosher, which is to say you could buy the hashgacha, even though you didn't know whether he cut them up with a treif knife. Possibility. At least then you could buy, according to this, if it wasn't double harif, everyone will agree. If it's a double harif, now we have a difference of opinion between these different poskim, whether you can or cannot. So let's say the most maker would say that if you're in a fruit store or a supermarket where you can assume the guy cuts lots of pieces at a time, then you'd be allowed to be makel. In a restaurant, maybe not, but in these kind of cases, where you know he cuts up lots of pieces, that there's bittul on 121, then you'd be okay. Now, in the later poskim, the Chachmas Adam brings the din of the shach. But it's just my feeling. I don't know if it's accurate that most contemporary poskim go along with what the simple reading of the Mechaber, which is what the Aruch HaShulchan says, which is along the lines of the Yad Yehuda. I don't think the Aruch HaShulchan quotes him. I don't know if they were, if he saw that sefer. But the Aruch HaShulchan, that the simple reading is like that it's mutter in all cases of double harv, assuming that you cut a lot of pieces. Okay, so that the kula, which is the most kal of the explanations, the Yad Yehuda's pshat. It could be that some people will be machmer the Chavos Das when it comes to Pesach, because there's lots of chumras for Pesach, and the shach in the case of the Chavos Das said that in the case Pesach you should be extra machmer because there's possibility of choshev in here. That's it.